Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's video lecture, and we covering the respiratory system. So let's go ahead and begin. Functions of the respiratory system include providing oxygen to body tissue for cellular respiration, removal of carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a waste product of the cellular respiration. And also some non-vital functions such as sensing odor, speech production, coughing, important in childbirth, right? So that's considered to be something that important function, but you probably not gonna die if this function affected. Okay, so if you look at this diagram over here, you can see that we have respiratory tract, and it actually can be divided into upper and low respiratory tract. Now, upper tract include nasal cavity, pharynx, that, everyday name for pharynx is throat, larynx, what you call voice box. And then low respiratory tract is your trachea, primary bronchi, then, all this division of bronchi, like secondary, tertiary bronchi, bronchioles, and lungs, right? Okay, so just very quickly, again, you need your respiratory system to deliver oxygen to every cell of your body, right? Like your neurons, your kidney cells, your liver cells. So pretty much you're made of cells. So every cell require oxygen, and your cells need oxygen to make ATP and use this ATP as a cellular source of energy. And your cells make ATP using cellular respiration, right? And they need oxygen to do it. And also during cellular respiration, your cells will produce waste products. And one of those is carbon dioxide. So you need to remove this carbon dioxide, and you also use your respiratory system to do it. Okay, so here we can see major organs that will include they include a nose, nasal cavity, paranasal sinuses, pharynx, throat, larynx, voice box, trachea, bronchi and their branches, lungs, and alveoli. Right, so that's pretty much a diagram over here that show you all those major organs. Now, when you look at respiratory tract, you can divide it into conducting zone and respiratory zone. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that in the conducting zone, you do not have gas exchange between air and your blood. You pretty much just deliver air, rich in oxygen, to your respiratory zone. And in the respiratory zone, you have this exchange between air inside your respiratory system. I mean, not air, oxygen. So oxygen will move from those respiratory bronchi, alveoli sacs, to your bloodstream, and carbon dioxide will move from the blood to the respiratory tract, right? So that's our respiratory zone, where you have gas exchange between respiratory system and cardiovascular system. Now, in a conducting zone will include trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles. And then respiratory zone, we're going to start with respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveolar sacs, right? So you can see over here as the number of tubes. So we have one trachea, you have two primary bronchi, right? Then you have four secondary bronchi, so on. And then you have 8 branches of the bronchi, and then you have smaller tubes. You call them bronchioles. Right now, if you look at the cilia over here, we do have cilia in conducting zone. And where do you have the cilia? Actually, inside those tubes, you will have epithelium, and epithelium that cover your trachea and bronchi is pseudostratified, columnar ciliated. So the lining inside of these tubes is made of epithelial tissue, and you will have cilia. You will have ciliated cells. Right now, why do you need this cilia? Because you will produce lots of mucus within your respiratory tract, and the cilia will push this mucus towards your throat, and then you swallow it, and and that's mucus, you swallow it and go to your digestive tract. Now, why do you need to push this mucus up? Because bacteria, some debris that found in the air, some dust will be trapped inside this mucus, and it's like a glue, right? In a glue, you will trap all the possible pathogens, right, or some dust, and you will push it back to your throat and to your stomach, right? So you can get rid of it pretty much, right? So you do have cilia in the conducting zone. You have some cilia in respiratory bronchioles, but in alveolar duct and alveolar sacs, you will not have cilia. Also interesting, if you look at smooth muscle and cartilage, you can see actually that we will have a lot of cartilage in trachea, we will have cartilage in bronchioles, but the amount of cartilage will decrease, all right? And when we get to bronchioles, and you also have smooth muscles here, right? In respiratory bronchioles and alveolar duct, alveolar sacs, you do not have cartilage. So pretty much the amount of cartilage decreases when you go from larger tubes to smaller tubes. And then starting with the smaller bronchioles, you do not have cartilage anymore. However, you still have some smooth muscles. In alveolar sac, you don't have smooth muscles, and you do not have cartilage. Well, just before we move to the next slide, very quickly, I want to mention, why do you need this cartilage, for example, in your trachea or in your bronchi? And this because you want to keep your respiratory tract open all the time. So you will have this C-shaped rings that will keep your trachea and bronchi open all the time. You don't want them to collapse, then you will have problem breathing, right? Now, why do you need smooth muscles? Well, smooth muscles can contract, and you can constrict or dilate those bronchioles. Okay, so let's look at some organs in more detail. So nose and adjacent structures. Nose is a major entrance for the respiratory system, and external nose will include, so you can look over here, root, right? Bridge, dorsum nasi. Now this is called ala. This is called apex, right? This over here, like a little line that goes from nose to your mouth, called philtrum. Also, if you look deep to your skin, you will see that you have, and deep to your muscles, you will see that your nose is made of nasal bone. So that's 2 nasal bones you have over here. Then you have partially of the maxillary bone. Maxillary bone is the bone of your upper jaw. And then you have septal cartilages. You have also alar cartilages right there. And inside the nose, you have septum. And septum divides your nasal cavity into right and left cavity. Also, we have internal nose. So we already mentioned we have nasal septum. It's not shown over here, but this will be, it's partially going to be a bony structure and partially going to be a cartilage that divide your nose into 2 cavities. And then on the lateral wall, you will have conchae. So conchae are also bony structures that produce those kind of like heels and grooves, right? So the lateral side of the nasal cavity is not flat, right? It's not flat. It has those ridges. Yeah, maybe ridges would be better. And underneath we have meatus, right? So this is nasal meatus. We have superior, middle, inferior, and we have nasal concha, superior, middle, and inferior. And what it does, it's increase the surface area over here. It's also when your air enters nasal cavity, it gives a little turbulence and slow down the passage of air to your throat and give you time to humidify and your air and warm it up, right? Also, paranasal sinuses are actually spaces within bones, and they covered by mucous membranes. They produce mucus and also make your skull lighter. Now, paranasal sinuses, we have frontal sinus, and the name tells you what bone this sinus is found in, right? So frontal sinus in the frontal bone. Then you have ethmoidal sinus in the ethmoid bone. You have sphenoidal sinus in sphenoid bone, and the biggest maxillary sinuses in your maxilla. And maxilla is your upper jaw. And if you've heard about sinus infection, that means that you know, there is infection and bacteria growing inside those spaces. Also, what is interesting here, you can see the scan of you know, of the head, and it's a mid-sagittal section, so you can see those spaces, right? Those are the sinuses. So you can see frontal, you can see ethmoidal, you can see sphenoidal sinus right here. And maxillary sinus you cannot really see because it's kind of where you have a nasal cavity and it just all look like empty space. Let's look what else we have on, you know, these pictures that might be important for us, because right now we're just talking about nose. It has lots of all these structures that we will cover on our next slides, right? So we have, so this is oral cavity over here, right? And this is superior, we have nasal cavity. Now the structure that separate oral and nasal cavity is called a palate. So we have hard palate more anteriorly, so that's a bony structure. Then we have soft palate and then uvula. Now we also have nostril or nares. It's called nares, internal nares. Then we have nasal vestibule. We already mentioned conchi, we already mentioned meatus. Now what else? And then, yeah, this we go to the pharynx, we will talk about it. And also we can see frontal sinus over here, right? Okay. Sphenoidal sinus, right there. And this one, olfactory epithelium. This is actually a cribriform plate. You have bones that called isthmoid bone, like this one, isthmoid bone, and you have opening within this bone, and what goes through this foramina olfactory nerves, right? And those olfactory nerves and epithelial tissue makes olfactory epithelium, and this allow you to smell, you know, to smell stuff around you. Okay. And by the way, here's this respiratory epithelium that we just mentioned. It's lines the conchi, meatus, and paranasal sinuses, and it's made of pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells, and it warms, humidifies incoming air, and it has also immune cells that protect you from infection. Now, by the way, it says here respiratory epithelium that covers this structure, but respiratory epithelium also found in your trachea and in your bronchi as well. So if you look over here, so that's a trachea and bronchi, you can see we have this upper part, that's our epithelium. So that's epithelium. And if you remember structure of epithelium, this is our pseudostratified, it has cilia, and it will have goblet cells and glands, right, that will produce this mucus, right? So this is a goblet cell. No, it cannot be goblet cell because goblet cells do not have cilia, but you know, so here's, for example, that would be our goblet cells. So I don't know why they put cilia over here and what do they mean by that, but anyway, we do have goblet cells, we do have glands, right? And epithelium is resting on a basement membrane, and then in respiratory epithelium, underneath basement membrane, we have lamina propria, that is areola connective tissue. Then we have smooth muscle layers. Then we have a fibrocartilaginous layer over here, and you can see those pseudostratified columnar became simple columnar with the goblet cells ciliated. And when we move to alveoli, then we have simple squamous epithelium. Now we move from nasal cavity to the pharynx. Now the pharynx, what you in English you call it throat, so it's all structure right here, and you can see it's colored here in 3 different colors: red, blue, green, and that because a pharynx can be divided into 3 parts. So that's your nasal cavity. So posterior to nasal cavity, you have nasopharynx. So it's from posterior nasal aperture, and aperture is just opening over here, running inferiorly to the end of uvula. And remember this uvula, it's the posterior part of the soft palate, right? So that's our nasopharynx. Now this, what's shown here in blue color is oropharynx. So it's from the end of uvula running inferiorly to mid epiglottis. So epiglottis is this cartilage over here. And what happens when you swallow food, this cartilage prevents food from entering trachea, right? So somewhere up to the midline of the epiglottis, right? And from the end of uvula, you will have, we have oropharynx, and then laryngopharynx from the mid epiglottis to inferior aspect of cricoid cartilage. Now, so that's again, this is our epiglottis, so it's a mid, and this cartilage over here is the thyroid cartilage, and then this one just below it is cricoid cartilage. So, so that's just inferior aspect of cricoid cartilage. That's laryngopharynx. So nasopharynx serves as air only. It flanked by nasal concha. We have pharyngeal tonsils, so tonsils right here. Oropharynx, passageway for air and food. And it also has tonsils. It has palatine tonsils and lingual tonsils. We will look at tonsils. This picture doesn't show them that well. So we will look at tonsils in the next slides. And laryngopharynx, also both food and air. It opens into larynx, right? So that's a larynx, and then we will have trachea, and opens into esophagus posteriorly. So this is your larynx, and after larynx you have trachea, and posterior to larynx we have pharynx. I'm sorry, pharynx is this. We have laryngopharynx, but we have esophagus, right? So this laryngopharynx, posterior it goes to esophagus, and anteriorly it goes to the larynx. And here's our larynx, what in English we call voice box. So it's a cartilaginous structure. It connects pharynx to trachea, regulates volume of air, and it has you know, several cartilages. Some of them are large, some are smaller. So let's look at those cartilages first. So this is the biggest cartilage, and this is anterior view, called thyroid cartilage. So here's the name. Now you have this part called laryngeal prominence, and this is what you call Adam's apple, right? So here again, this is our yellow part. That's our thyroid cartilage. Now inferior to thyroid cartilage, you have cricoid cartilage. And cricoid cartilage kind of goes around the whole larynx. So that's a posterior side is larger than anterior. So that's a cricoid. And here in the posterior view, you can see cricoid cartilage. This cartilage shown in purple color, this is our epiglottis, right? So that's the epiglottis. Epiglottis, as I said, prevent food entering larynx and then trachea. Also, we have these cartilages, two cartilages called arytenoid cartilage, and carniculate cartilage is this red structure over here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 7 cartilages, I guess. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I thought it's more than 7, but so far we have 7 cartilages over here. But yeah, I cannot think about any other, so maybe it's 7 cartilages. Now, what is glottis? Glottis is actually just the opening between vocal cords. So you do have vocal cords, and inferior cords, this one are true vocal cords, and we have false vocal cords or vestibular folds, and the opening, so you have one over here, and you would have, of course, another one, because you only see, half of the larynx, right? But you would have one cord and another cord, and between them, the opening is glottis. So here on this picture, we can see vocal cords better, right? So, and the glottis. Now this opening over here, see, and this is when it's opened. That's your glottis. And we have true vocal cords. And then you have this false, so that here and here, false vocal cords. So here's the false vocal cords here and over here, right? This is our true vocal cords, this one and this. And so you can see arytenoid cartilage over here. And glottis, that's the opening. So the true vocal cords are attached by muscles to thyroid and arytenoid cartilages. So thyroid is on front, arytenoid are those posterior cartilages, and membranous fold size differs between individuals. Okay. And of course, you can see that, you know, when the air enters your larynx, those true vocal cords, they vibrate and produce sound. So this is how you talk. Now we're moving to trachea. Now trachea is this structure over here. So it's anterior structure. Posterior to trachea, you have esophagus. So esophagus for food, trachea for air. Now esophagus is a muscular tube. Trachea do have muscles, but trachea also has cartilage. So this is C-shaped cartilage, keeps trachea open all the time. And it's not complete, it's not ring, it's a C shape. And on the posterior side, you have a muscle, trachealis muscle. And this does make sense because if, for example, you eat food and you need space for esophagus to extend, over here, you don't want a cartilage to be on its way because you can damage and break cartilage. And you know, cartilage does not heal very well. So that's why you have muscle on the back. And at the same time, you want trachea to stay open. That's why you have cartilage anteriorly. All right, so trachea has 16 to 20 C-shaped pieces of hyaline cartilage connected by dense connective tissue, connected by trachealis muscles, carries oxygen toward lungs, that's what trachea does, and it's lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, the same epithelium that you would find in your nasal cavity. Now, if you look at histology of trachea, it has 3 layers. It has mucosa, and it's a mucous membrane, right? Then you have submucosa, that will be our connective tissue. Then we have hyaline cartilage and adventitia. So if you look at over here, that's our mucosa that made of pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and it has lamina propria over here, right? Of course, it will have basement membrane, and then it will have lamina propria, and lamina propria is areola connective tissue. Then we have submucosa right here, and submucosa has glands, sera mucus glands. So they produce serous fluid and mucus, right over here. And then we have hyaline cartilage right here, and we do have some a small amount of muscles as well. You do have muscles, a smooth muscle in trachea, and you know, adventitia is not shown over here, but it's also connective tissue covering the trachea. Right. Okay, so we continue with the trachea. Now you can see that trachea gonna branch, right? And it's branch into bronchi. So here's our trachea shown in brown. Then you have a cartilage called carina over here. And then the first bronchi are called main bronchi, right? So we have right and left main bronchi, and then they will be divided into secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi and so on, right? So over here we have segmental bronchi. So trachea branches into bronchi, also lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelium supported by cartilage, and it forms what we call bronchial tree. And bronchioles are small bronchi, right? So, so the primary bronchi, when they divided into secondary bronchi, we have 3 lobes in the right lung. So we have 3 secondary bronchi, and we have 2 lobes in left lung. So we have 2 secondary bronchi. So that was conducting zone that we described so far. And now we're moving to respiratory zone. So terminal bronchi is still conducting zone. So that's still conducting zone. So there is no gas exchange. But when we get to our respiratory, I'm sorry, it's not bronchi, it's bronchiole. Of course, it's very small tube. So terminal bronchiole. But when we move to respiratory bronchiole, this is where we're going to start respiratory zone. So the name respiratory bronchiole is named this way, you know, for reason. Now, respiratory bronchioles then have this alveolar duct, and on the alveolar duct, then we have alveolar sacs. So it's look like a grape, right? So this whole structure is called alveolar sac, and individual balloon called alveolus. And you can see we have lots of capillary covering those alveoli, and that's for reason because this is where we will have gas exchange between air inside alveoli and capillaries. So respiratory zone contains structure involved in gas exchange. Bronchioles lead to alveoli. Now, if we look at the structure of alveolus, so here we start with, of course, we have alveolar duct first, right? So, so this is our bronchiole, right? So that's a bronchiole. And then it leads to alveolar duct. In alveolar duct, we will have some alveoli. And then those circles over here, those are our alveoli. So now if you look at the individual alveolus, you can see that it's made of simple squamous epithelial cells. We call it type 1 alveolar cells. And then we will have type 2 alveolar cells that are not that numerous. So for example, right here, type 2 alveolar cells produce a special liquid called surfactant that keep alveoli open. Now you also can see we have macrophages, and they're gonna, you know, clean this air that reaches alveoli. And over here we have capillaries. So you see how close those capillary wall to the alveolar wall, because this is where we have gas exchange. So alveolar ducts, smooth muscles and connective tissue open into cluster of alveoli. Alveolar sac is a cluster of many alveoli. Each alveolus is, you know, like 200 UM in a diameter, connected to neighboring via alveolar pores. So here you can see those alveolar pores. And we already mentioned that capillaries are actually very close to alveoli. And here we have opportunity to look at the structure of alveolus and capillaries in more detail. So actually over here, right, this is our alveolus. So it's made of the type 1 cells, right? So those are our type 1 cells. And because it's epithelial tissue, it has a, basement membrane, right? So we have basement membrane and we have simple squamous epithelium. Then capillaries, they also made of simple squamous epithelium that we call endothelium because it's inside the blood vessels. So we have, endothelium, and endothelium, they have also, endothelium has basement membrane. So we have pretty much type 1 alveolar cells. We have fused basement membrane. So it's both alveolar and capillary basement membrane. And then we have endothelial cells. And this structure is respiratory membrane. And you can see how oxygen moves to the blood and carbon dioxide moves from blood to alveolar space. So respiratory membrane is interaction between alveolar and capillary membranes. Okay, and here we're looking at alveoli again in more detail. We have type 1 alveolar cells, that's squamous epithelial cells, 97% of alveolar surface area, and they're permeable to gases. Then we have type 2 alveolar cells that I already mentioned, so shown here like in this green color, and they secrete surfactant that reduce surface tension and keep your alveoli open. Then we have macrophages that are phagocytic cells, remove debris and pathogens. Right, so that's a beautiful picture. I really like it. Shows nicely. You can see the capillary right there with red blood cells and how close they are to the wall of alveoli. You can see macrophages here, right? You can see type 2 alveolar cells shown here in green. Now we're moving to lungs, right? And right now it's just a gross anatomy. It's a pyramid shaped, bordered by diaphragm on the inferior surface, enclosed by the pleury. So they have pleura is a serous membrane covering lungs. Right lung shorter and wider, has 3 lobes, and left lung smaller volume than the right, have 2 lobes, and it has cardiac notch. Now the reason why left lung is smaller, because right here in the mediastinum you have heart, and heart is partially like I would say 2/3 of the heart located towards the left side of your body. So let's look at those lobes and need to remember their names. So we have superior lobe, right? This is a superior lobe as well. And then we have inferior lobe, and we do have inferior lobe on a left lung, but in the right lung, we also have middle lobe right here. That's easy to remember. So superior, middle, inferior, and superior and inferior on the left side. Now, those called fissures, and fissure separate your lungs into lobe. This is horizontal fissure, and this is oblique fissure. All right, let's see if we have, yeah. So, right, so, and I'm trying to get, okay, so here and here we have oblique, here we have oblique, and over here we also have horizontal. What else we can see? We can see trachea over here, primary bronchus, and those are lobar or secondary bronchus. Lobar, we call them lobar because they bring air to the lobes, right, of the lung, and this one has 2 lobes, so it will have 2 lobar or secondary bronchi, and the right one will have 3, right? One over here, 2 and 3 secondary or lobar bronchi. Blood supply to the lungs. Let me see how many slides we still have. Yeah, maybe I'm gonna stop over here. I don't want this lecture to be too long, right? So far we just covered anatomy of the respiratory system, function of the respiratory system. So in my second video, we will look at the blood supply, nerve supply. We will look what pleura is, and a little bit of the diseases of lungs, right? So thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful.